G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here, and I want to talk about the biggest estate on earth, how Aborigines made Australia, by a man called Bill Gamage. And this is a painting, it's a really old painting, done by a European artist, come out to Australia, painting it the way they saw it in what Bill Gamage calls 1788 Australia, which in his shorthand means the way it was before it got changed by the white man. And you'll notice that you've got clumps of trees, you've got open clear spaces, you've got isolated big trees, and the whole place had a manicured, artificial, contrived look to it, which meant that people likened Australia, the pre-1788 Australia, to being an English gentleman's country estate, because the whole place looked as if it was just perfect. Alright? And when I was a kid, I was taught that that was because European artists were just so incredibly stuck in their ways, stubborn, blind, that they painted Australia the way they remembered Europe as looking. Because everybody who painted after, 50 years of Australian colonisation of Australia, painted something entirely different. It wasn't green and well manicured like this. It was a harsh landscape with choking thick forest. Across Australia, early Europeans commented again and again that the land looked like a park, with extensive grassy patches and pathways, open woodlands and abundant wildlife. It evoked a country estate in England. Bill Gamage has discovered this was because Aboriginal people managed the land in a far more systematic and scientific fashion than we have ever realised. For over a decade, Gamage has examined written and visual records of the Australian landscape. He has uncovered an extraordinarily complex system of land management, using fire and the life cycles of native plants to ensure plentiful wildlife and plant foods throughout the year. We know Aboriginal people spent far less time and effort than Europeans in securing food and shelter, and now we know how they did it. With details of land management strategies from around Australia, the biggest estate on earth rewrites the history of this continent, with huge implications for us today. Once Aboriginal people were no longer able to tend their country, it became overgrown and vulnerable to the hugely damaging bushfires we now experience. And what we think of as virgin bush in a national park is nothing of the kind. Here's a list of praise from Geoffrey Blaney, Nicholas Rothwell, Bruce Pascoe, Tim Lloyd, Peter Boyer, Robert Macklin, Tony Stevens. This is published by Allen and Unwin. Bill Gamage is a respected author. And this is ISBN 978-1-74237-7483. First published in 2011. Copyright Bill Gamage, 2011. I'm going to give you a bit of a book review. It's dedicated to the people of 1788 whose land care is unmatched and who showed us what it is to be Australian. Fire, grass, kangaroos and human inhabitants seem all to depend on each other for existence in Australia. For any one of these being wanting, the others could no longer continue. Fire is necessary to burn the grass and form those open forests. But for this simple process, the Australian woods had probably continued as thick a jungle as those of New Zealand or America. Thomas Mitchell, Sydney, January 1847. Observing that the grass had been burnt on portions of the flats, the blacks said that rain was coming on would make the young grass spring up, and that would bring down the kangaroos, and the blacks would spear them from the scrub. Oswald Brierley, Evans Bay, Cape York, 1 December 1849. Illustrations are particularly cool. Australia in 1788, why was Aboriginal land management possible? How was the land managed? And then invasion. There's a lot of illustrations. and I'm going to concentrate on them in this movie. Looking at light. Swamp gum southwest of Scottsdale, Tasmania, January 2011. Light shades eucalyptus. In shade they grow straight. On a shade edge they bend and branch to the light. In light they spread. A eucalyptus's shape is thus a history of its surrounds. Mountain ash swamp gum in Tasmania is familiar as a tall straight forest in cool wet regions. Unlike most eucalyptuses, it's fire sensitive. Its wet forests suffer fire rarely, but when fire comes it's a raging furnace and the trees die. Then, in the rich ash, thousands of seedlings race straight up, battling their neighbours for light. This swamp gum is about 210 years old. It is this shape because it lives in the open with plenty of light. Why, if this species usually grows in dense thousands after a fire? A bushfire would kill it and replace it with swathes of competing seedlings, whereas in a long absence of fire this land becomes rainforest. Only centuries of controlled fire could burn back adjacent rainforest without ever touching this sensitive tree. It is near springs on an old walking track. It tells of Tasmanian land management. Yellow and apple box Canberra, September 2006. Adjacent eucalypts lean different ways to dodge the shade of neighbours. You can see those neighbours after they're gone. Smaller trees lean from the site. If the light moves, for example, a neighbour grows, trees gyrate from the shadow, if necessary reversing 180 degrees, except for balance starving branches which fall into shade and unleashing new branches into the light. This picture shows such gyrations. At left, a yellow box leans away from larger trees which once stood between it and the western sun. About 1938, they were cleared to make a view and the box pushed into the vacant light. A stump and two branches are shown. Other branches are higher up. At right, an apple box also reached for the vacant light, but turned sharply away as its neighbour's branches took the space. Seeing trees not there can be invaluable. See that? It started to grow one way and then turned back. This land has few big trees. The nearest is about 70 metres away, yet at rear young eucalypts and wattles, survivors of regular mowing, clutter the ground. Off photo at right, they're even denser. Why aren't their grandparents as dense? Many seedlings lose the race for light and die, but under similar conditions, not in one generation more than another. Some giants may have been felled by axe, fire or age, but if so, more should remain as stumps and root depressions. They were never there. In May 1832, 7 or 8 years after Europeans first occupied it, Robert Hoddle surveyed this land. The box is on a ridge he called open forest, a category between grassy and dense, which he used elsewhere. Along the crest and upper slopes he drew a 150 to 200 metre wide neck of open box, gum and apple separating grassy plains and lower slopes carrying few trees or none. The edge between them oscillates over height contours, the same soil and the same aspects, and each side of it now carries post-1788 eucalypts. That was not so in 1832 because the land was controlled by fire. It's going to be a bit difficult to talk about this. A white gum on Ellesmere Station, a big white gum ribbon or manna gum on the mainland, was 200 or 300 years old in 1985-86. Its branches spread unlike the surrounding saplings which grow straight up, racing for light. Those fast-growing youngsters caught their parent, which first lost lower branches to the shade, then bent its next branches up to compete for light. This gum began in the open and then it adapted to forest. See? The old tree that's grown in the open, surrounded by its descendants, after there were no more Aborigines to manage the land with fire. Same story here. This is near Canberra. Whereas this one, south of Jericho, Tasmania. Eucalypt recovery from fire or drought. Threadbow, February 17, 2006. These snow gums are regenerating from lignotubers after the hot January 2003 fire. Mallees too resprout like this near Australia's coldest and hottest extremes, eucalypts grow similarly. In the background are gums twice this size, but really big gums are rare. Why? Since the young gums are so dense. Eucalypts and acacias after a December 2001 bushfire in Canberra, photographed in 2008. Eucalypt recovery from fire or drought. Can you see how many times this tree has died and regrown? As has this one. Recovery from a fire. Eucalypts are really good at it. They can look dead for decades. Kangaroo grass near Berrydale, New South Wales, and in Canberra, late summer 2008. Most introduced grasses are winter or spring flourishing annuals. Most natives are summer flourishing perennials. Fire and drought kill annuals readily, but native perennials rarely. This made native perennials invaluable. Being perennial, they reshoot green when burnt, and being summer flourishing, feed grazing animals when drought is worst and fires most easily lit. Burning thus attracted the animals, and limiting the burn concentrated them. People burnt carefully, for perennial pastures also carried herbs, annuals, tubers and bulbs, each needing different fires. 1788's most widespread grass was kangaroo grass. Its summer tan was Australia's dominant colour in 1788. Under heavy grazing later it was reduced to refuges, but is now returning to destocked land. Picture 10's dense swathe, quote, like an even sweeping field of oats, as Leichhardt put it in 1844, indicates land not heavily grazed. The lighter vestiges are wild oats, an introduced annual dead in summer. Picture 11 shows kangaroo grass, green, dense and moisture shielding in late summer. Its myriad corkscrew seeds can pin cushion kangaroo and bull hides, but Aboriginals and early settlers burnt it every 1 or 3 years to lure and locate grazing animals. I'm going to look at a painting by Arthur Streeton, 1889 painting called Golden Summer, Eaglemont. This land near Melbourne Overleaf has no stumps and scattered trees lacking low branches and spreading narrowly, so they grew in forest. They predate European occupations, suggesting that settlers cleared the country. So that's what it looks like in country cleared with axes and saws and people grubbing the stumps out. Sydney, Parkinson, 1745 to 1771, a view of Endeavour River, Queensland, July 1770. Okay, this is apparently what Australia really did look like. Spaced rows of trees, wide open grassy areas, grass butting up against rainforest. It was a template. This is Cooktown, where Cook beached Endeavour for repairs. It shows a very varied mosaic. On the mountain at the right, the right rear, a sharp edge separates trees from grass, and the hill below is mostly grass. At right, a dense shoreline forest gives way to a mere line of young trees, perhaps broken when Cook's crew cleared a camp and got firewood. At left is an open shore. Hills and slopes carry tree lines or lanes, a feature much more common in colonial art than in the bush today. Careful, cool fires made them. The hills at left carry blady grass in different fire recovery stages, some tall, some lawn, some between. It is a rapid coloniser after fire and useful feed when young. On 19th of July, Aborigines set fire to it around Cook's camp, and its sudden fury caught his crew by surprise. People were using an alloy as a weapon, though July is in the dry season when grass is still burnt to keep back snakes and to make green pick. Here we have an 1809 painting of the Second Cataract on the North Esk near Launceston in Tasmania. This is a manicured landscape. Okay, No doubt about it. And down here, you can just barely see what's left of it in the photograph. The Europeans, the landless, ignorant peasants from Europe comes, have just about completely stuffed this country, and we're all supposed to feel gloriously grateful and patriotic for that. From 2 hours per person per day to get all your food, clothing and shelter, keep everything that you make and give away 90% of whatever you hunt or gather, and that way nobody goes to bed hungry no matter how bad a day they have. And somehow it's progress to work 40 hours a week and pay 35% tax, 10% GST, 9% superannuation, and have somebody go to bed hungry every night. The Europeans have destroyed the Australian ecology for the benefit of an export colonial ideology. The idea that markets in Europe must be fed, whatever they demand. And the idea that this was terra nullius is as self-centeredly, arrogantly, ignorantly insane as the idea that it was the manifest destiny for the white people to steal the continents of North and South America because they had bigger and better guns. Here we have another juxtaposition. Eugen von Gerard, crater of Mount Eccles, 1858. And 2007. You can just barely see the tree lanes. This isn't bullshit. This country was a manicured estate. The entire continent. Uluru, 1894, 2005. 1894, 2005. By wiping out the free-range Aborigines, the Europeans wiped out the fire management strategy. Fire-scarred dunes in the Great Sandy Desert west of Lake Mackay, Western Australia, 1953. And you can see the mosaic patch burns. People have been out there burning their country, keeping it in order. This is June 2005, same area. You haven't got the little mosaic burns. You've got out of control big hot wildfires. Because there aren't any free range Aborigines even in the Western Desert in Western Australia. So the country is not being looked after. Eucalypt grass mosaic, northeast Tasmania, 1998. Creeks frame hills. For example, the road at left follows a ridge which falls to a creek. On each side, grass is both higher and lower than trees, but most crests are treed. People use different fires to make trees, grass, water edges and clumps in plains. Lively's bog, the road loop at top left, typifies the area. East from trees, grassland drops to a swampy creek, then rises past tree clumps to a semicircle of forest. This was a wallaby trap. Prey could reach grass safely through trees, which then let hunters drive it into the swamp. This template fills the country. Grass burnt in sequence rotated wallabies predictably from one patch to the next, harvesting different mobs and never making one mob too spear shy. The flats are rich but the high ground is poor, so this is good use of it. The template was flexible but simple to maintain. What fire to use and when varied across Australia, but the purpose was the same, to associate water, grass and forest, providing habitats and making the clean, beautiful landscapes dear to Aboriginal feeling. And they did a bloody good job at it too. They knew what they were doing, unlike the progress-oriented, scientifically motivated white European settlers. You don't need a chainsaw or an axe to make clearings in Australia. You need generations of fire management. You need your ancestors to have known what they were doing and to have taught your parents so they could teach you, so you could teach your children. Good luck doing that in a computer age world when the power runs out. So that's why Australia suffered such a huge ecological collapse in the 1860s, 70s, 80s and 90s. Not only was the ground overgrazed, but it wasn't burnt correctly and everything just fell to pieces. Bundaleer Station in Queensland, 1877. Somebody put thousands of years of work into making that country look that way. And we fucked it in 50 years or less. Rule Britannia, marmalade and jam. 5 Chinese crackers up your arsehole, bang, 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 bang. World's best practice. Most stable culture on the face of the planet. And it was wiped out for the benefit of the sheep. Why? How is it progress to wipe that out for the benefit of a textile industry 12,000 miles away? Anyway, Warble's on a lot to YouTube. In the next movie of this book, we might have a bit of a look at what he's got to say about Aboriginal religion. Ciao.